and a job so deadly it held one of the highest fatality rates in the entire war. They were called tunnel rats, volunteers who entered the dark, knowing they might never crawl back out. In this video, we're going to explain how the Viet Cong built and concealed their tunnels, and what was life down there, how the US soldiers and allies found them, and what countermeasures were taken, including gas, flooding, and most notorious job ever, tunnel rats, what challenges they faced, what requirements and equipment was mandatory, why the ones doing the riskiest job were the most poorly equipped. During the Vietnam War, lethal devices known as booby traps played a significant role in the tactics used by the Viet Cong. These devices were often simple in construction, but they served a strategic purpose that went beyond immediate harm.
Be hiding. The patrol search turns up punji pits filled with needle-sharp bamboo sticks. And sprouting everywhere are the bamboo spears the Marines call Victor Charlie toothpicks, sharp enough to pierce a boot, often smeared with crude poison.
Many traps were not designed to kill, but to injure. A wounded soldier typically required evacuation, which could tie up several others for rescue and support. This disruption slowed down the patrols, reduced combat effectiveness, and sometimes exposed units to further attack or ambush. To increase the likelihood of long-term injury or infection, many traps were coated with poison. When chemical agents weren't available, human or animal waste was sometimes used on the spikes to cause serious infections, making even non-fatal wounds potentially life-threatening. One of the most well-known examples was the punji pit, a concealed hole lined with sharpened bamboo spikes. These pits were often simple to construct and could be hidden under thin layers of leaves or grass. Local villagers contributed materials like bamboo spikes and even helped building the traps, either voluntarily or under pressure.
All the villagers are soon assembled for questioning. Although the inhabitants deny any involvement with the VC, there is disconcerting evidence to the contrary. A clump of bamboo spikes is found, such as those used by the VC for punji stakes.
Some of the most notorious included improvised explosive booby traps, including grenades set under floorboards, in pits, or tied to tripwires stretching across jungle trails. Some were hidden inside abandoned gear or even under enemy flags. US soldiers who tried to take down the Viet Cong flags to pose for a photo or raise their own were sometimes met with deadly surprise. Snake traps involved tying venomous snakes in hidden containers or holes. When a soldier reached in or stepped too close, the snake would strike and attack both sudden and terrifying. As American forces pushed deeper into Viet Cong strongholds, places like Iron Triangle and Cu Chi, they began noticing something strange. For all of the signs of enemy activity, the enemy itself seemed to vanish. Whole operations would go by with barely shot fired. Something wasn't adding up. Then the ground began to open. Small camouflaged holes that led to vast underground networks began to be discovered. At first, they tried blasting them, like they done with Japanese caves in World War II, but it didn't work. For every entrance sealed, another 3 seemed to remain undetected. But these weren't just hideouts. They held weapons, intel, and entire command posts. They couldn't be ignored, so a new kind of soldier emerged, the tunnel rat. They were volunteers, small, wiry, and chosen for nerves of steel. Claustrophobia and fear of dark ruled out you immediately. These men squeezed into pitch-black tunnels, no wider than a person's shoulders, crawling through stale air filled with traps, snakes, and the constant possibility of an enemy waiting, never knowing if a tripwire, a viper, or a Viet Cong fighter was waiting just ahead. They were barely equipped, but not unprepared. Every item they carried had a purpose, and in those tight, silent tunnels, Purpose meant survival. No rifles, no armor, nothing bulky that could echo or get jammed in the narrow, coffin-like walls. In a place where movement was measured in inches, even one extra item could mean getting stuck, or worse, slow down just enough. What they faced inside was unlike any battlefield above. The air was stale and often toxic. Traps were common, booby traps tied to tripwires, rigged grenades, spike doors. Sometimes the tunnels were flooded. Sometimes they caved in, and sometimes they opened into pitch-black tunnels where the enemy waited silently with a knife or a pistol of their own. The Viet Cong knew those tunnels well. They were their strongholds. For Americans, every turn was a gamble to survive. The tunnel rats had to memorize the feel of their weapons, reload by touch, and map the layout with nothing but a compass and gut instinct. There was no such thing as solitude either. The tunnels weren't just home to people. They were overrun by spiders, snakes, rats, scorpions, and biting insects, most of them poisonous, and all of them hungry. Life underground wasn't just difficult, it was a constant test of the human threshold for discomfort and fear. The tunnels were tight, often just wide enough for one body to crawl through. There was no standing, no stretching, no privacy. You lived shoulder to shoulder, knee to back, in a web of darkness that felt alive. The air was stale, thin, and poisoned with carbon monoxide. Some tunnels were so narrow and low that even turning around became a small struggle. The pistol was often .45, brutal at a close range, but dangerously loud in confined tunnel. Some carried suppressed revolvers with subsonic rounds just to avoid blowing out their eardrums. Knives weren't just for fighting, they were tools used to cut through roots, bamboo, and tangled wires, but also poke dirt ahead, gently pressing into the soil, searching for the pressure plate of a landmine or the give of a trapdoor. A knife used right could save a life before it ever drew blood. During sweeps by American and South Vietnamese forces, silence was obsolete. No talking, no movement. You didn't cough, you didn't cry. You just waited in the dark, listening. Sometimes soldiers above heard whispers through a vent or a faint click of a metal from behind a hidden trapdoor, but mostly the tunnel swallowed sound. People didn't live down there for years like the myths suggest, but in areas under constant threat, some stayed underground for weeks, even months, terrified that a single footprint or a dropped grain of rice could betray their location. As the role became formalized, the army built training tunnels and developed better gear, more flashlights, probing rods, communication wires. But no matter the tools, the job remained what it always was, a slow, silent hunt through darkness. While many of these traps were rudimentary, their use had notable impact. US military reports estimated that approximately 11% of American deaths and 17% of wounded during the conflict were caused by traps and mines. Though sometimes exaggerated in films, these traps were far from fantasy. These devices were carefully placed around the base perimeters, trails, and suspected patrol routes. In many cases, subtle markers, like stacked stones, twisted grass, or notches on trees, were used to warn local fighters of their locations while keeping them hidden from outsiders.